The taste of ash was still in my mouth from the coffee I'd choked down that morning, but it wasn't the bitter caffeine that made my stomach churn. It was the moment I looked across the polished mahogany table, past the grim faces of investors and board members, and saw my brother David, his eyes colder than I'd ever seen them, utterly devoid of the warmth that once defined our bond. "Ethan," he began, his voice smooth and measured, a performance perfected for this very stage. "The board has voted. It is with a heavy heart that I announce your immediate removal as CEO of Novacor, effective immediately." The words hit me like a physical blow, stripping the air from my lungs. Novacor, our company, the dream we built from nothing, now stolen by my own flesh and blood. The betrayal wasn't just a wound, it was an amputation, tearing away a piece of my soul. I remember the shock, the utter disbelief that clouded my vision, making the faces around the table swim. My mind, usually sharp and analytical, seized up. David, my older brother, the man who had been my partner, my confidant, my best friend since childhood, he stood there outwardly sympathetic, a carefully crafted expression of regret on his face. But beneath it, I saw a flicker of triumph, a cruel satisfaction. He had orchestrated this, the whole damn thing. The whispers, the subtle criticisms of my leadership, the manufactured crises, it all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. This wasn't a corporate disagreement. It was a coup. And I, the visionary who had poured every ounce of my being into Novacor, was the casualty. Our story began simply enough. Two brothers, a shared passion. I was the tech genius, the one who saw the future in lines of code. David was the charismatic business brain, the one who could sell ice to an Eskimo, who understood markets and strategy. We founded Novacor 8 years ago in my cramped garage in California. Our vision was simple, a groundbreaking AI-driven analytics platform that would revolutionize data processing. We were inseparable, fueled by cheap pizza and an unshakable belief in each other. David handled the investor pitches, the financial projections, the relentless grind of business development. I built the product, assembled the engineering team, nurtured the innovation that was Novacor's heart. We were the perfect pair, complementary halves of a formidable whole. We promised each other that we would never let anything come between us, that family and our shared dream would always come first. That promise, I now realized, was a lie uttered by only one of us. In the early years, David's ambition was a driving force. He pushed us harder, always seeking the next round of funding, the next big client. I admired his drive, his unwavering belief in our potential. He'd often say, "Ethan, your head's in the clouds, dreaming of algorithms. Someone needs to keep our feet on the ground and our eyes on the prize." I chuckled at his playful jabs, never imagining that the prize would eventually become something he sought to claim entirely for himself. There were small disagreements, of course. He'd sometimes push for decisions that prioritized short-term gains over long-term stability or ethical considerations, and I'd push back. But we always found a middle ground, a compromise. I trusted him to have Novacor's best interests at heart, and by extension my own. He was my brother. How could I not? The seeds of betrayal I now saw were sown subtly, carefully. Over the past year, David had started sidelining me from certain key investor meetings, claiming they were high-level financial discussions that I didn't need to burden myself with. He'd taken over more and more of the external communications, becoming the public face of Novacor. I was deeply involved in leading our R&D team, refining our product, a role I loved. I believed we were simply dividing and conquering, playing to our strengths. I even felt a sense of relief thinking he was taking some of the pressure off me. I was so focused on the code, the innovation, the creation, that I failed to see the careful dismantling of my power, the systematic erosion of my influence. The board meeting that day felt like a blur of accusations. David presented fabricated reports, highlighting perceived cost overruns in my department, delays in product development that were actually strategic pivots, and poor communication skills on my part. He even brought up personal anecdotes, twisting them to paint me as erratic and unstable. It was a vicious character assassination, meticulously planned and executed. The investors, many of whom had been cultivated solely by David, listened with grave expressions. When the vote came, it was unanimous. Except for mine, of course. I was effectively evicted from my own home, a stranger in my own company. I walked out of that office not with rage, but with a hollow emptiness. The city outside, a bustling hub of innovation and dreams, felt alien. I went home to my apartment, a sterile space now filled with the ghosts of shared ambitions. I felt foolish, a naive idealist crushed by the cold reality of corporate power. The tears didn't come immediately. It was a deeper pain, a numb shock that paralyzed me for days. My phone rang constantly, concerned employees, bewildered investors, but I couldn't answer. I just stared at the ceiling, replaying every interaction with David, every shared laugh, every solemn promise. Had it all been a lie? Had he always secretly resented me, my talent, my vision? The thought was unbearable. But then a flicker. A text message from Maya, our lead software architect, one of my earliest hires, someone I had mentored for years. "Ethan, I know this seems impossible. We're all stunned. Call me when you're ready. There's more to this than you know." Her words were a tiny spark in the crushing darkness. More to this? What could be more than my brother systematically betraying me? But it was enough. Enough to pull me back from the brink of despair. Enough to ignite a cold, steady flame of resolve. I wasn't just heartbroken, I was betrayed. And that betrayal demanded justice. My first call was to Maya. She spoke in hushed tones, almost whispering, clearly terrified. "Ethan, David has been systematically creating a narrative against you for months. He's told investors you're burnt out, that you're losing your edge, that you're too focused on abstract ideas instead of market demands. He's been manipulating data, reallocating funds, even blaming budget overruns on your projects when they were actually his own pet ventures." Her voice cracked. "He made me alter some of the project reports, made me sign off on things I didn't understand. He threatened my job, my visa. He has everyone scared." This was the first revelation. Not just a spontaneous coup, but a meticulously planned campaign building momentum behind my back. It explained the unanimity of the board vote. David had poisoned the well, carefully isolating me. The shock of hearing how deep David's manipulation went was profound. It wasn't just a corporate takeover, it was an emotional one, a calculated character assassination that twisted truth into a grotesque parody. Maya's confession, brave as it was, also brought another unsettling revelation. She mentioned a specific new venture David had been pushing, a high-risk gamble into a completely different market sector than our core business. He'd been diverting significant company resources into it, bypassing the usual approval processes. This raised a red flag. David was always ambitious, but he was also pragmatic. This felt reckless, almost desperate. My next step was difficult. I contacted Sarah, our older sister. She was a successful lawyer, pragmatic and sharp, but always fiercely protective of our family. I laid out the bare bones of what happened, the coup, the accusations, Maya's warning. Sarah listened, her usual calm demeanor slowly dissolving into a look of concern. "David wouldn't. He couldn't do this, Ethan. We're family." Her initial reaction was denial, a common response to such deep betrayal. But I pressed her, showing her the cryptic messages from Maya, explaining the deliberate isolation. "Sarah, something isn't right. I need your help, not as my sister, but as a lawyer." This was another twist. Her initial disbelief forced me to articulate the depth of the deceit, solidifying my own understanding. Sarah, despite her personal ties, agreed to help. She connected me with a top-tier corporate litigation firm. Their initial assessment was bleak. Mr. Cole, the lead attorney, a formidable woman named Eleanor Vance, a familiar name to me, it turns out, from the previous story I narrated in my channel, A Bitter Irony, explained, "They've built a very strong case against you. Your board removal seems legally sound on paper. To overturn this, we need undeniable proof of fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, or an illegal power grab." This was my biggest fear confirmed. David had played by the rules, or at least made it appear so. The game had changed. It wasn't just about getting my company back. It was about exposing the lies, dismantling the carefully constructed facade David had built. I became a ghost in my own life, meticulously piecing together fragments of information. I used my tech skills, my deep knowledge of Novacore's systems to start digging. I accessed archived emails, old server logs, financial records from before David had locked me out. It was slow, painstaking work, like sifting through sand for gold dust. I found anomalies, unusually large wire transfers to a shell company in the Cayman Islands, expense reports with vague descriptions that seemed to correspond to David's increasingly lavish lifestyle, even subtle, undocumented changes to the company's equity structure that disproportionately favored David. Revelation 1: David's Secret Debt. The first major breakthrough came when I uncovered a series of private, unsecured loans David had taken out, totaling over $1 million. He'd hidden these from me, from the board, from everyone. They were linked to an investment in a highly speculative cryptocurrency startup that had cratered spectacularly a year prior. This was it. Not ambition, but desperate fear. David wasn't trying to build Novacore. He was trying to save himself from personal financial ruin, and he saw Novacore as his golden parachute. He needed full control to liquidate assets, sell off parts of the company, or even sell it outright, to cover his monumental debt. This transformed my understanding of his motive. It was no longer about outshining me, it was about survival at any cost, even my destruction. With this crucial piece of information, Sarah and Eleanor sprang into action. They sent a strongly worded legal letter to Novacore's board, citing financial irregularities and a potential breach of fiduciary duty by David, demanding a full, independent audit. This was my first official counter-move, and it sent shockwaves through the company. David naturally denied everything, calling it a desperate act by a disgruntled ex-CEO. He rallied the employees he'd cultivated, painting me as a bitter, vengeful man. The internal division within Novacore grew, splitting the loyalties of people I had once considered family. The next few weeks were a blur of legal maneuvering. Eleanor and her team were relentless. They subpoenaed David's personal financial records, something he fought tooth and nail. His resistance only strengthened our case, hinting at something he desperately wanted to hide. Meanwhile, Maya, our brave inside woman, continued to feed us information. She sent me screenshots of internal communications where David explicitly pressured her and others to manipulate financial reports and even to plant evidence of my supposed incompetence. This was concrete proof of his deliberate malice. Revelation 2: The Silent Partners. David's legal team tried to block our access to the board minutes from the past year, but Eleanor persisted, obtaining them through a court order. What we found was chilling. David hadn't just swayed the existing board. He had secretly appointed 2 new advisors to the board in the past 6 months, individuals with close financial ties to his failed crypto venture. These were not independent voices. They were his creditors, disguised as corporate advisors, placed there to ensure he could control the company's assets to pay off his debts. This was a direct breach of corporate governance and a clear conflict of interest. It meant the board vote to oust me was not just unjust, but potentially illegal. The legal pressure ratcheted up. David was cornered, but he was also a wounded animal. He started making threats, obscure texts to my personal phone, implying he knew where my elderly parents lived, subtle warnings about my reputation, my future career. He played dirty, true to his nature. He tried to have Maya fired, but Eleanor had already secured her testimony under protective orders, making her untouchable. His desperation was palpable, but it was also dangerous. I realized I was dealing with a man who would burn everything down to save himself. Revelation 3: The Forged Documents. One evening, sifting through the mountain of internal documents Maya had provided, I noticed a subtle inconsistency in a key shareholder agreement that dramatically altered Novacore's vesting schedule, favoring David. My tech whiz brain had a knack for spotting patterns for anomalies. I zoomed in on the signature. It looked like mine, but something was off. The curve of an E, the slant of an N. I sent it to a forensic document examiner. The results came back a week later. My signature had been expertly forged, not just copied, but painstakingly replicated, likely from an old document I'd signed. This was a felony. This was not just business. This was criminal fraud. This was the most shocking, unbelievable moment for me. My own brother, forging my signature to steal my company. The depths of his betrayal knew no bounds. With the forged documents, our civil case transformed into a clear criminal matter. Eleanor immediately informed the authorities. The FBI initiated an investigation into corporate fraud, identity theft, and embezzlement. This was beyond what David could control. His smooth charm and carefully cultivated image would crumble under the harsh light of a federal investigation. He could spin a narrative to a board. He couldn't spin it to the Department of Justice. The news of the FBI investigation leaked, devastating Novacore's stock price. Major investors panicked. The truth, ugly and raw, was starting to spill out. The board, now facing potential legal liabilities for David's actions, turned against him. The advisors he had installed, now exposed as his creditors, hastily resigned, trying to distance themselves from the impending fallout. The company, my company, was in turmoil, but at least the cancer was being cut out. Revelation 4: The Gambling Addiction. During the FBI's investigation, another truth emerged, one that explained much of David's reckless behavior. He wasn't just in debt from a failed crypto venture. He had a severe gambling addiction, hidden for years. He had accumulated astronomical debts from high-stakes poker games and online sports betting, using company funds to cover his losses, then desperately trying to recoup them through increasingly risky investments. The crypto scheme was just one manifestation of this addiction. It was a vicious cycle that had consumed him, and Novacore was simply his latest, biggest chip. This twist revealed the tragic depth of his personal struggle, but it didn't excuse his actions. It merely painted a clearer, darker picture of the man who had been my brother. The weight of David's actions, the sheer scale of his deception, now bore down on him. He was losing control. He tried one last desperate maneuver. He called me, his voice a frantic mix of anger and desperation. "Ethan, please, we're brothers. Don't do this to me. Think about Mom and Dad. We can fix this. We can make this right. Just tell them you made a mistake, that it was a misunderstanding." He was pleading, bargaining, but the pleas were laced with an undercurrent of threat, the usual manipulation. "Think about what this will do to our family, Ethan, to your reputation." His words hit a nerve. The thought of my parents, their hearts broken by this spectacle, weighed heavily on me. The guilt, the doubt, the emotional conflict of destroying my own brother almost broke me. But then I remembered the forged signature, the stolen dream, Maya's fear, the unsuspecting investors he'd almost ruined. I remembered the man who looked me in the eye and lied, who systematically dismantled my life for his own selfish survival. "David," I said, my voice cold and steady, "you made your choices. Now you face the consequences. Our family was destroyed the day you betrayed me." I hung up, my hands trembling, but my resolve firm. The trial was swift and brutal. With the FBI's meticulous evidence, the forged documents, Maya's testimony, and the detailed financial forensic report, David had nowhere to run. He pleaded not guilty, maintaining his charade of innocence to the bitter end. But the prosecution's case was airtight. The media, hungry for a Silicon Valley scandal, covered every agonizing detail. His carefully curated image as a brilliant, ethical entrepreneur was shattered, replaced by headlines screaming "Brother betrays brother, tech mogul accused of massive fraud." The moment the verdict was read, guilty on all counts, was anticlimactic. There was no triumphant cheer, no surge of joy, just a quiet, profound sense of exhaustion. David stood there, his face ashen, finally stripped of his bravado. His lawyer immediately began discussions of an appeal, but it was a losing battle. The judge sentenced him to significant prison time, citing the egregious nature of the fraud, the identity theft, and the violation of trust. He was also ordered to pay full restitution, an amount so vast it would likely bankrupt him and his family for generations. His professional career was over, his name synonymous with deceit. The aftermath was a long, painful process of healing and rebuilding. Novacor, battered but not broken, needed a new direction, a new leader. The board, chastened by the scandal, offered me back the CEO position. It wasn't an easy decision. The company felt tainted, the dream fractured, but I looked at the faces of the loyal employees who had stood by me, the innovation we had nurtured, the potential still lying dormant. This was my legacy, my creation. I couldn't abandon it. I accepted, but with new conditions: greater transparency, a revised corporate governance structure, and a renewed focus on our core values. Rebuilding Novacor was an immense challenge. Investors were wary, employees were shaken, but we rallied. I implemented stringent financial controls, brought in a new COO known for integrity, and focused relentlessly on innovation. Slowly, painstakingly, we began to regain trust, to heal the wounds David had inflicted. The company emerged leaner, stronger, and more resilient. My personal life was also a slow journey back to normalcy. The emotional scars remained, a constant reminder of the profound betrayal. Trusting people, especially those I loved, became a conscious effort, a daily battle. Sarah and I, despite the pain, found a new depth to our relationship. We grieved the loss of the brother we once knew, a ghost haunting our memories. My parents were devastated, their hearts shattered by the actions of one son and the agonizing trial of the other. Their family, once a pillar of my life, was irrevocably changed. I often thought about David in prison, stripped of his charm, his power, his freedom. There was no victory dance, no vengeful satisfaction, just a quiet understanding that justice, though painful, had been served. His actions had led him down a path of self-destruction, and he had ultimately paid the price. I had reclaimed my company, rebuilt my life, but the experience had hardened me, made me wiser, more cynical perhaps, but also more resilient. The naive idealist was gone, replaced by a man who understood the shadows that can lurk even in the closest relationships. I learned that even brothers can become enemies, but that truth, however brutal, can also set you free. The truth was exposed, the consequences were real, and I, Ethan Cole, found my strength not in revenge, but in the unwavering pursuit of justice and the arduous path of rebuilding.